So for the past few months, I was actually blah blah blah. All right,
Nice.
Can't
wait to hear more about it. All right, no.
We just defeated Genesis Rhapsodus, and now it's time to recover and have a chat. With me today, I have Brad, the chosen undead.
I was really hoping that you'd lean in on that. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
And Gerardo, protector of the Earth Realm.
Greetings.
And me, I am Hunter, and I am also here. So we kind of have a loose kind of
itinerary
episode structure for this one. We've done some conversations before where we're just kind of talking about the games that we've been playing and why we're playing them, some kind of brief descriptions of why we're enjoying them, maybe or maybe not enjoying them. So that's kind of what we're trying to do today. Just kind of go over the games that we're currently playing. A gaming update part 2.
Sure, I'll go with that.
So Brad, I know that we're both kind of Dark Souls Soulsborne genre enjoyers.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you just started with Elden Ring recently.
Well,
and I've played all of the main series Dark Souls games, and you're just now getting into the first original Dark Souls. How is your experience with this so far?
I'll actually start this with the history of, I'm going to call Souls games, because while Elden Ring is the first of From Software games that I kind of played, it wasn't really like a first Souls-like game that I played. I started with Blasphemous. And while that's not FromSoft, but it is very similar in its approach to the game. Very high difficulty, kind of like that bonfire. You have limited flasks that you can use. And it's very much inspired from the Souls game. So that was actually my first foray. But then Elden Ring got announced, jumped on that bandwagon, literally redefined the way I looked at gaming over the last 10 years. It has actually been an eye-opening experience to play that game. It was the most fun I've had in 10 years of gaming with that game. I think the last time I played a game that gave me that feeling was with Skyrim when it first came out.
Okay.
And I know people want to like to rag on Skyrim, but when it first came out, that was a really good game, and it drained a lot of hours out of me. But ever since then, I went from Elden Ring. I played Sekiro after that.
Nice.
Which full disclosure, I think so far at least, I still have to play the rest of the From game, but that is the hardest game I have ever played in my life. That's a very hard game. And now I'm playing Dark Souls. The Steam summer sales came by. I saw it. It was like $16-17, the whole thing, the remastered. I had to get it. I've had Dark Souls 2 in my queue for like forever. I couldn't justify playing it without playing the first one.
Sure, yeah.
And there's been a few parts that have kicked my butt. There were some things where, it's an older game now. It's been about 10 years or so. So
sure.
I have inevitably seen things online with how people have dealt with bosses before. So when they showed up, I kind of already had like a understanding as to what other people have done, because just inevitably it's a very popular game. People talk about it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's been as hard as like other people who've played Dark Souls for like the first time.
Yeah. Our first time experience, yeah.
Yeah, so I might be a little tainted. However, there was still a lot of early deaths and a lot of things that have tripped me up. I think a lot more, not so much in the bosses, but in some of the the platforming that I was actually kind of surprised that Dark Souls does.
Yeah. And I don't know what they were thinking with some of those platforming segments.
And I was actually incredibly shocked by how much platforming they expect me to do in such a game.
For a game that handles so poorly.
Yeah, for a game that's not meant for platforming whatsoever, there is a surprising amount of jumps, drops, roll intos that to be quite frank, I don't think they should have existed. I think most of my deaths were from that tree section getting into the ash lake.
Oh, yeah.
of trying to avoid the curse the giant curse frogs. I forget what their names are, but you know what they are.
Mhm.
And just rolling to my death or trying to get an item and not necessarily knowing how to approach it and just falling to my death. And it's currently I'm in the painted DLC area, so I opened up the fire, the fire altar or I believe that's what it's called. I could be wrong.
Mhm.
And I am currently trying to figure out what I'm doing in that painted picture DLC. I don't
So
know what I'm doing.
the painted picture isn't a DLC. That's
Oh, it
a
isn't?
part of
I
the
thought it was.
main game. No,
Oh, okay.
the first DLC, or I think the only DLC, was Artorias of the Abyss.
Mhm.
So you haven't been to the Abyss yet. That actually was one of the first places that they designed when they were making the game. They actually, that's why it's so well designed. Actually, just level design wise, is
Mhm.
that was one of the first places that they did, and why it's so disconnected from the rest of the game, like tucked away behind that picture and everything, because
Mhm.
that was the first playtest area that they developed to show focus groups and stuff, like
Oh, okay.
the Dark Souls game when it first came out. And they loved it so much, but it didn't really fit into the larger story that they were trying to tell. So they tucked it away inside that area. What was it in that one cathedral or something like that? So
It was off to the left in
on
oh
Orlando,
shoot. What was the name of it? Yeah, Arno Londo. What was it?
on an Orlando, which is
And
one of my
Orlando.
favorite places in any Souls game. Just beautiful,
So
awesome.
so far that place was awesome. Honestly, like I know that Elden Ring takes a more open world approach, but man, I do have to give linear. It's not necessarily linear, but it's somewhat linear design. It's like the devil is due when you're able to actually engage with what the developer wants to put in front of you and
Mhm.
overcoming a challenge or task. It's really fun. It's really fun. And so far, the part that I was in awe of, but also put the fear of God in me was Ash Lake
Oh yeah.
because in Blight Town, which was awful. I understand why people hate it,
Yeah.
and I understand the strategy of getting around it. It's like, okay, when you get poisoned or toxined or whatnot, don't heal
Mhm.
yourself. Just wipe out everything as fast as you can.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're just gonna get poisoned again. It doesn't matter. And also, just ignore poison because, like, yeah, it hurts you over time, but it's not that bad. But when I walked into when I went to the Ash Lake, for one, it's just so weird getting into it. You got to go into a tree and open two illusionary doors back to back,
Yeah.
and I'm like, this seems like a cheat code, but it unlocks a whole area of the game that
That's
seems important for
it's
a whole
kind of
covenant.
important
And
for
I'm like,
lore and stuff, yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, and I just open up and I'm like, oh my god, this place is huge. It looks awesome. Honestly, it reminded me of Elden Ring a lot because of all the trees. But
Mhm.
and and I noticed the bonfire, and then all of a sudden I start getting pelted by water cannons. I didn't even realize that a hydra was like a giant hydra was after my ass.
Mhm.
And this is before I even killed one, so I didn't even know how to deal with it. And I don't have a range build. I play the Ooga Booga way, where I just have the biggest, heaviest sword I can wield and swing it.
Strength build.
And yeah, it's strength, but I also have a shield, so I use the shield to like gauge out enemies in terms of like, okay, what's their pattern? And then
Mhm.
when I feel like I'm confident, then I go two handed to the sword.
Okay.
That whole reaching the dragon, the one that you bond a covenant with, was
Mhm.
just me trying desperately to run away from this hydra and not get pelted and die.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind when the hydra flew over the land into the other side of the lake just to continue chasing me. And I'm like, oh my god, the, there's
Yeah.
no cover in the second half of that run.
I feel like Blighttown is when the game starts really ramping up in difficulty. Because basically
Mhm.
from Blighttown onward, it's just nonstop hell. Like you're just
Yeah.
no matter where you go, you're just all the way through Blighttown basically, and then you get to the bottom, and then you get to like to the Ash Lake, and it's just nonstop, just intense. Like
Yeah,
just
yeah, that was the most intense part so far of the game for me. And I understand that the Hydra isn't really a boss, but like when you haven't experienced all the bosses yet, and I wasn't like the highest level, and I was kind of rushing through the area, it
Mhm.
was scary. Full disclosure, I am a grind, like I grind games when it comes to like, oh, I can level up. I grind my level ups. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of enemies and bosses that I did not experience that hard of a time with, or I was able to do on the first try. Partly because I know how to play the games, but also because I really grinded and specced out my character.
Mhm.
I think one of the bosses that people tend to have difficulty with is the two knights before you meet the queen or the princess.
Ornstein and Smo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know people had a big problems with them, but I was able to do it on my first attempt, partially because I was
Okay.
very over leveled.
Wow. What a
I was
okay.
very over leveled, so I'm not joking. I probably was level 100 by the time I even met him,
Wow. Okay.
and and my whole philosophy was okay. I'm not going to fight two people at once. That's just sounds awful. So I'm going to do the whole circle around the arena. All right,
Mhm.
see what the patterns were, and then I took notice that the Lance guy likes to do full screen like attacks. And I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, that's when I could get my swing in. And because I chose the Ooga Booga build and maxed out my poise as best I can with the heaviest armor, like my endurance
Mhm.
has always been higher than my health, no matter which of these games I play. I always have
Mhm.
high endurance. And so when he does the full screen, I tank the hit and I deliver the schmeediest whack I could. And then I continue my
Yeah.
laps.
That's how you play Dark Souls, though, especially in Dark Souls 1, where you have to just ridiculously overpower dodge roll.
Yeah.
It's one of the best dodge rolls in all of video games because you're
I've
just
only have
invincible the entire time and it covers so much ground.
I only have the medium, and I've only ever played with the medium dodge roll.
But it's
So
like good
I
enough, though, right?
it no, it is good enough, and
Yeah, yeah.
I made it an effort to make sure that I can wield the heaviest stuff that I could as long as I
hmm
can hold on to the medium dodge roll.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then
That's how you do it.
yeah,
Especially in Dark Souls 1, strength builds are the way to go
well,
because you're able to have this really high defense. No matter like you have the shield out, and it basically just doesn't affect you as much as it would like almost every other player.
yeah, and the spells have a limit use for this game. It isn't like a
hmm
magic meter or anything. It is a like, hey, you can only do this 5 times, and I do have one spell, but it's a healing spell. It's
Yeah,
there just to make sure I don't have to use the flasks. But that's it.
yeah. And that spell is only really good for topping off after battles because it's
Yeah,
so
no, it's
slow to do. So,
yeah, it's literally just there to make sure I don't have to waste a flask.
man, hearing you say that you got through Ornstein and Smo so easily, I mean, to be fair, I
It's
got
not my first
through.
Souls game.
Yeah, it's not your first Souls game, and I beat Dancer of the Boreal Valley in Dark Souls 3 first try, and that's apparently one of those that just people hate. So like because it's basically like an Ornstein and Smo styled fight. It's just
Yeah.
super extremely difficult, and like the game does not train you well enough in order to fight it. So it's there's a lot of design reasons why it's really difficult. But Ornstein and Smo I think is difficult for a similar reason. So
Yeah.
we're having opposite kind of experiences. I had a really hard time with Ornstein and Smo,
Did you
probably
die a
because I
lot
chose a
during
magic build. But what?
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I when I saw that there was like a cap, like a use cap on all the magic, I'm like, oh, I'm not
hmm
touching magic. I don't care. Um and
You can get more
I
copies of the same spell, and that helps.
yeah, I'm sure there's ways around it. It can't be all bad. The how many times did you die in Bed of Chaos? Because I actually died, I think, 3 or 4 times on that one. I
It's
know
been
that
so
one.
long.
That one isn't
Uh,
like it's more of like a run through because he like you only have to get to its heart and hit it once and it dies, but you have to like
yeah.
open up the paths in order to do that. But I kept falling and dying because I didn't even realize that the stage was falling apart.
Yeah, I think I had quite a bit of falling and dying. I don't remember. I remember a lot of the really memorable moments of the first Dark Souls, like Ornstein and Smo, some of the other boss fights, and Orlando just in general. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't. don't quite I remember the bosses. I'm having a hard time remembering what my experience was like through a lot of them because it's so much game.
It is. In the same way that Elden Ring opens up its second half of the game. Yeah, I say second half. I mean more like it's like you close out the first third.
Hmm.
But like when the rest of the game opens up and you finally defeat Godric and you're just like, oh, I wonder what's next. Am I going to the castle yet, or am I going to the city yet? No, it's this whole map, and
Well, that's
you essentially just did the tutorial, and I'm like, I'm 40 hours in. I'm like, for what
so
the?
depending on. I think that technically you can get to this area at like really early on in Dark Souls, but have you been to the through the Valley of the Drakes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Because it does a similar thing where you're not supposed to be able to get to it really early on. Like it's a hard area, but it kind of opens up and connects the entire world in a way that
yeah.
it makes it a lot less linear. It kind of it loops back to the main bonfire. It loops back to a lot of the different areas, kind of like an in between world.
Yeah, it's when I say linear, I don't necessarily mean that it's like a NES game, but it's like a everything's connected, but like
Hmm.
if but there is kind of like a linear approach to the when you're in the areas that you have to kind of go through, but it's all connected. So
It's very Metroidvania, I think, and
yeah.
the it's you have these like passageways that you're supposed to go through in the order like the way that you're supposed to go through it, and then you have these like but they connect like one side to like the other side will connect to completely different like themed areas, and they all
Mhm.
connect to each other in really complicated ways. So there's like this big web kind of. It's not open world, but it's like this like webbed kind of Metroidvania
Yeah.
kind of style world.
It's like tree roots.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like everything branches out. Yeah, it's a really fun experience, and honestly, I'm pretty sure that the next I think year is going to be me going through a lot of the From Software games,
Nice.
and I already have Dark Souls 2, so I might as well jump into that once I'm done with this. I was told by my friend, don't beat the game yet because you get locked out of some content from Dark Souls. I think that was like the DLC stuff.
Yeah, I
So
think
I'm
that you need to do Artorias of the Abyss
yeah, so
before you do the fight, at least the final boss fight, before you
yeah,
fight Gwyn.
so I'm gonna try to do everything that I can before fighting Gwyn. There was one sad thing that happened, and I accidentally killed an NPC character that I didn't mean to. And that's just a problem with my computer. Like sometimes I click out of the game so that I can see something. Like if I'm trying to look something up on Chrome because I'm like, or on like Google or
Hmm.
something, I'm like, ah, man, I really don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And in order for me to get back in the game, I like click on the window, but that counts as an attack in the game too.
Mm.
So I was standing in front of the blacksmith in the city, the big guy who
Oh
sells me the
no!
twinkling smithing stones, and then he got
You
pissed and
killed
tried
him.
to kill me. And I had to
Oh,
kill
okay.
him, and I'm like, this was the only man I could buy twinkling stones from. I am so screwed.
Wow,
Yep,
man,
having a lot of fun with Dark Souls.
I'm so happy you're going through Dark Souls. It's one of my favorite games ever.
You got
I
to play
think that
Sekiro. You got to play
I
Sekiro.
know I need to
That
play Sekiro. I need to. I have only played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 from FromSoft. I haven't played any of the other games. I need to play Sekiro. I need to play Bloodborne. I need to play Demon Souls. I have a PS5 now. I should just play the Demon Souls remake.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things that I need to play and just need to like sit down and actually get through it.
Yeah,
But I don't know. Tears of the Kingdom came out. There's so many things, so many
yeah, I know.
distractions right now.
I'm well aware. Speaking of which, what's distracting you right now?
So I am preparing for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the Ever Crisis mobile game by
Ooh.
playing through. Right now, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII. Like I'm rather replaying the original Final Fantasy VII.
Mhm.
I'm towards the end of Disc One right now. We've been about to start the Disc Two content, so I'm just kind of recapping myself on some of the events from Final Fantasy VII, and just be Crisis Core as well. I'm kind of in the middle of putting together a presentation type thing that maybe will go on the channel one day about kind of some of the theology theological references behind Final Fantasy VII. And so that's also been like a really good reminder for me. And kind of like multi-purpose playing through Final Fantasy VII and the whole Final Fantasy VII, what is it, compilation of Final Fantasy VII or whatever it's called. So
Final Fantasy VII seems like its own series within a series, being like, at least in my opinion, from what I could see with Final Fantasy, it's its top dog. But
yeah, it's for sure the fan favorite of Final Fantasy fans. So yeah, there's a lot of, because there's like the films, there's a whole bunch of like light novels and stuff, and yeah, there's just a lot to the Final Fantasy VII world. There's so many games too. There's Before Crisis, Dirge of Cerberus, Crisis Core, which I just beat. The First Soldier was a thing and then got ended development or something like last year or this year or something. So yeah, I'm just kind of like recapping myself on the story, especially since it seems like they're introducing a lot of plot elements from a lot of those expanded games, like Crisis Core, especially actually at the end of Final Fantasy VII Intergrade. There seems to be some kind of connections to Crisis Core. And there was also some connections to Dirge of Cerberus for some reason. So I'm just kind of playing through a lot of the content that I either overlooked the first time around or just never really played in the first place, like Before Crisis. Mm-hmm. Just kind of absorbing the whole story in preparation for Rebirth, because it seems like it's going to diverge pretty differently from the Final Fantasy VII story that we're all familiar with.
Well, for the most part, I haven't actually played Final Fantasy VII. I know some of the major beats, but it has been on my radar to play for like the last 10 years, and I've never done it, unfortunately.
Same.
Well, Gerardo, you just started, like a few months ago, started the original Final Fantasy VII, and you're about halfway through the remake, I would say?
Yeah, I played 10 hours of both. So
okay.
Far.
I need to come over again one weekend and just sit down and we can play through the remake again, because, or at least finish the remake, because I feel like you're pretty close to the end right now. And you've already played at least the part of the remake that is, or rather, the part of Final Fantasy VII that is included in the remake, right? I think you just entered Calm or something like that.
Yeah, and I was doing some of the flashback sequences that show up around Sephiroth there.
Mm-hmm.
How do those games play? It looks like Kingdom Hearts to me. The remake.
So the idea is, in order to perform an action, it's not like my turn and then your turn and then my turn and then your turn. The idea is that each character has a speed, and they wait for their meter to fill up based on speed, their speed stat. So like Cloud's speed stat is very middle of the road. So you'll like wait for his meter to fill up. And then once it's filled up, it's your turn to attack. It's Cloud's turn to attack. So you can select Cloud, you can choose attack, you can choose magic or whatever. And when you're in those moves, when you're like picking your attack, it's the entire game pauses for a second. So when you're selecting which magic to use, for example, the enemy can't attack you. Everyone else's time meters have paused, and then you perform your action, and then the rest of the battle can continue on, and you're waiting for your meters, whoever's character's meters, to fill up again. And the remake has a similar system where in order to perform any magic or anything, you need to wait for your meter to fill up. And there's kind of like multiple layers of meters. So like you're kind of waiting for the meter to fill up, and then once you do, you can pick which magic to choose. And again, just like the original, the entire game pauses, and it waits for you to kind of pick which action that you want to do, and then you can continue. But unlike the original, while that meter is filling up, you actually can perform some actions, kind of Chrono Trigger-like. You can run around the world, kind of, and you can actually perform some very basic attacks. You can just click on the square button and just kind of do some attack. They don't do that much damage. It's more for flavor, kind of. It's more just for fun. Something that you can do while you're waiting for your ATB gauge to fill.
Yeah, get those minor chips in.
Yeah, it kind of chipping away at the health, some chip damage. So it's interesting. It's kind of blurs the line between an ATB turn-based system like the classic games and a real-time action game like some stuff that's released today.
Okay, so when I saw like the commercials when it was first getting released, I thought it looked very much like Kingdom Hearts, so that's just kind of how I assumed the combat would be.
It's not
But
as open as Kingdom
that
Hearts.
actually, yeah, I was gonna say that sounds much different than what I was imagining in my head.
You also do have a battle arena, so it's not like it goes into like the battle mode like in a lot of older like JRPGs. You
Yeah.
are playing on the world, kind of like Chrono Trigger. Like the battle just kind of opens up, but you can't
Yeah.
leave the battle. Or it's like a fake arena kind of like forms around you, and you're battling there.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of can run away. There's some stuff that you can do, kind of, but like for the most part, you're sectioned into that battle area. But that battle arena is in the real world, so it's not like Kingdom Hearts where you can just kind of it's a bit more open, where you can run around anywhere.
Okay, that changes the way that I have that I'm viewing the combat. It actually does sound, because Kingdom Hearts is kind of, press X to win a lot of the times. There's some things you do differently, but it is a little friendly to newcomers. This one actually sounds like you have to think about it a little harder than you think than like Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, it's a turn-based ATB game in disguised as an action RPG, party-based action RPG. It's interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that Gerardo and I might have an episode one day if I ever come over and we just sit down and beat the rest of Final Fantasy VII Remake and just kind of talk about the nature of remakes and how this game's take on it is kind of very different from a lot of other games remakes that we've seen so far.
That's true. I like that it's different and also don't like it at the same time.
Interesting. Why don't you like it?
It feels like it's saying subtly that the modern world has no place for traditional turn-based RPGs. Subtly. Like, not necessarily, but maybe a little bit.
Interesting. Well, I think that
part of it is probably because I've played a lot of the first-party PlayStation releases lately, and basically a lot of those game series have gone towards over-the-shoulder third-person action game type experiences, and that kind of feels like what Final Fantasy VII Remake is trying to go for also.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm getting a little oversaturated with that gameplay style.
Yeah, that's a very Sony problem to have.
I think that you're right, but I also think that Square Enix has been not abandoning the turn-based JRPG games, because they've been releasing stuff like Octopath and remakes of Live Alive, all the HD 2D remakes, the Bravely Default series. They haven't abandoned turn-based RPGs. All of the Tokyo Game Company, whatever that new subsidiary they started that did like I Am Setsuna and stuff like that. So they've been kind of releasing some turn-based games as like spiritual successors kind of to the classic Final Fantasy games. So I think that that's not necessarily that they're saying that there's no place for turn-based RPGs. I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake is attempting to reference the ATB style of the original Final Fantasy VII while also trying to modernize and go into a new direction with it. That's a bit more like a combination of Crisis Core and like Final Fantasy 15.
Oh, I haven't played those yet.
Highly recommend
I
Crisis
played Final
Core.
Fantasy 15.
15 is a bit more mixed. I really enjoyed it, but a lot of people didn't, and I understand why.
I lost gas in the middle of the desert, and the game forced me to push the car for 20 miles in the middle of the night.
That sounds great. I love it.
And I gave up. No,
Dude.
It wasn't great, because every time you died, you go back to where your car lost gas.
Yeah.
Sweet.
It was. I understand what they were trying to do, but man, that was punishing.
So for the past few months, I've been playing Pokemon Gold. I've never played the original second generation games, except for a long time ago. I had a Pokemon Gold cartridge that I got from a friend of mine, but the save data battery was dead at the time, which is surprising to me because that was pretty early for it to be dead. I think it was like 2006 or 5. My main takeaway from Pokemon Gold here is that I actually really liked the game. I played Heart Gold before. I actually wasn't a huge fan of it.
Gen 4 as a whole was kind of one of the weaker generations, in my opinion.
I
That's
agree.
the one I started with.
I'm sorry, Brad.
Sorry, you just have bad
I'm sorry
taste.
you had to start with that generation, Brad.
Oh, give me a break. There's some recent generations. I'm glad I started where I did.
You know what? That's fair. That's completely fair. I think one of the first main things that I really liked about Gold was that it was actually challenging. Like I did have to grind, but it wasn't like a walkthrough for me like a lot of the recent Pokemon games were. And that's just like that's irritated me about the recent games. They've just been too easy. So I get kind of bored of them. And then this one had it had difficulty spikes which aren't great, but it at least presented like a challenge for me to get around. And it's not like it's difficult to grind in Pokemon. When all your Pokemon die, you don't lose save data like in some RPGs, like older ones.
Yeah.
So I still had fun doing it. It just took a little longer than I was expecting. Plus, Gold has the whole Kanto region that you can go into after you beat the Pokemon League, and that's just really cool.
Yeah.
And you get it's like you get 2 Pokemon games in one, and then you confront Red at the top of Mount Silver, and that's really cool.
Isn't that like awesome post-game content?
Yeah, it's just freaking great. And like none of the other Pokemon games have like gone that far into like the post-game content, I would say. So I really appreciate that about Pokemon Gold. So now that I'm done with Pokemon Gold, I've actually started training for Evo since I'm going to Evo.
Oh,
So
that's
I've
so
been
cool.
playing a few games to train for that. Because at Evo, I'm going to be fighting in Mortal Kombat 11, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Melty Blood type Lumina. So I've been practicing in those games. Like I've been kind of switching off, just like when I feel like it. Mostly MK11 because I'm better at that game, and I want to train more with the game that I'm good at. Because I know that I'm going to get destroyed in Marvel vs. Capcom 3,
Yeah,
regardless. Because I've barely played that game since like 7 years ago when I have a PS3 copy of the game. I don't have a PS4 copy, and that's the version I've been training on. So
people
I'm gonna get
grind
destroyed.
those games. People
But
grind
that's
those
okay.
games all the time. There's been dedicated fan bases since the 90s, I think, for
Yeah.
for that game.
So yeah, I'm gonna get completely destroyed, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not like the most incredible fighting game player. I think I'm pretty decent for like an average person.
I remember we played Mortal Kombat, and I couldn't get a just win off of you, like without having to resort to cheese
Yeah.
or something weird.
And part of it was like that was a while ago, and I tend to be really bad at defense.
Yeah.
When I'm like in a fighting game, I get really hard into just like rushing my opponent, and so it leaves me open almost constantly. So I've been trying to get better at defensive stuff. So I've been playing those 2 games. I don't actually have my Melty Blood type Lumina. I have the Melty Blood game before that, which is called Actress Again, current code. And then I've also been playing Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 and Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. And the reason why I've been playing those is it's also for training, but it's like a different kind of training because those games are like from a different era and they're a little bit more basic. They don't have some of the more in-depth mechanics that modern fighting games have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they train the basic fighting game skills a bit more than like trying to get into the nuances of like MK11, for example, or the nuances of Marvel vs. Capcom 3.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking this kind of approach that I like. Mortal Kombat 3 has this quote from some guy who I don't know, but the quote is, "There is no knowledge that is not power." And that's the kind of approach that I'm taking to it. Because I had this experience a few years ago where I played through Mortal Kombat 2. I beat the game with every character, and Fatal Fury Special. And after I did that, I noticed that I became better at every other fighting game, just in general.
Yeah.
Because I pushed through those 2 games, especially because like Fatal Fury Special is probably the hardest game I've ever played and beaten.
Those games were ridiculous for its time.
Yeah.
Oh god.
They wanted all your coins in that arcade cabinet.
Yeah, they took them.
And they took them. It's like you press the punch button, and it's like that controls the opponent's defend button also.
It's awful. It Yeah, it knows exactly what it is that you're doing, and only every now and so often it's like, oh, I'll let him have this hit.
Yeah. And at least in Mortal Kombat 2, you can find a way to cheese the AI and exploit them. If you just like keep repeating like a certain jump kick at like a certain pace, you can get around the enemy's AI and like get their health down so that they don't counter everything you do. But anyways, so that's what I've been doing. And then what I mentioned before with Melty Blood, I don't have Type Lumina, so I'm not playing that one. So the first time I play it is going to be at EVO when I compete in it.
And this is your first time going to EVO, right? Or did you go last year?
I went last year, but I didn't fight in any of the tournaments. I was a spectator.
Okay.
But then I realized, because last year I didn't fight because I was like, I'm not going to win anyway, so what's the point? But then I realized that it's not about winning, it's about losing with all your friends.
Yeah.
So I signed up to fight this year, and so I'm going to lose with all my friends this year, and it's going to be fun.
It's about getting in there in the community, doing your best. Like, yeah, of course you're not going to win, but that's not the point.
The real victory was the friends you made along the way.
Or getting that one victory. You don't have to win the tournament. You just need to be that one guy.
The real victory was getting 2-0'd by some guy in a fox costume in front of all of your closest friends.
Now that we've recovered and had ourselves a little chat, what did you think?
Leave us a comment on YouTube and like the episode.
That really helps us out.
We're also on Twitter and Instagram at the Low HP Podcast if you want to reach out there.
And subscribe if you want to catch more of us on YouTube.
We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Links in the show notes as always.